Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar, Transforming Procurement Through Contract Lifecycle Management. My name is Fred Kang. I'm a director on the product management team here at Ironclad, and I'll be moderating today's session. So just a quick, some facts about me. I've been at Ironclad for about 4.5 years, working on our repository, reporting, workflow designer, and AI products. And over the last year, I've been really diving deep into CLM for procurement teams. So I am super excited to moderate today's session with Jeffrey Rajamani, Senior Analyst at Forrester. He's a true expert in the field, so I'll let him introduce himself.
Thank you, Fred. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're joining from. My name is Jeffrey Rajamani. I'm a Senior Analyst at Forrester. I'm based in Germany. I cover two things at Forrester. I look into the label that we call as Supplier Value Management in the industry that's known as source to pay. And I speak to a lot of user companies, as well as I speak to a lot of vendors who bring in technology in the space. That's one of my coverages. I wear a second hat as well. I look into the outsourcing industry. So everything to do with technology outsourcing and also business process outsourcing. I'm really looking forward to this discussion with you, Fred, to talk about strategic contract management.
Amazing. And we are super excited to have you here today. So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items for all of our attendees. One, feel free to use the Q&A tab to submit questions, and we'll do our best to get to all of them at the end. We'll have about 10-15 minutes for Q&A at the end. And next, this webinar will be recorded, and we'll send out a copy for everyone here, so don't worry about taking notes. So today, again, we're going to hear from Jeffrey on how the overall procurement landscape is shifting and how that really necessitates a new modern tech stack, right? We'll discuss how CLM fits into this tech stack and why it's so important for procurement leaders to be thinking about contract management really as a strategic activity rather than a transactional one. All right, so let's get into it then. So I think we should start, before diving into CLM or contracting, Jeffrey, can you help really set the stage for us on how procurement and the sourcing landscape overall is shifting, right? And what are some of the major trends that procurement leaders really need to pay attention to right now?
Fantastic. Thanks for this question, Fred. Well, when you talk about procurement function, it has traditionally been seen as a cost function. So, procurement is responsible for acquiring those goods and services that organizations need in order to function effectively. Now, if you look back over the last several years, and also specifically over the last 5 years or so, global supply chain disruptions have happened. There has been complexity in supplier relationships, rising costs, regulations. With all this happening, the procurement function cannot remain where it is. And we see that the procurement function is transitioning from cost to value and now actually towards customer. What I mean by that is the procurement function now places customer entirely at the center of their entire responsibilities. They are focused on customers' priorities. And this means that it doesn't mean that cost is not important. It doesn't mean that value is not important. They are equally important. But today, if you focus on customers' priorities, you need to start focusing on innovation. So procurement is focusing on that co-innovation and co-creation with the supply ecosystem, because we think that the true value comes from working with suppliers. And then procurement is also looking into the ESG of organizations. I'll talk to that a little later in more detail, but they are looking at reliable, sustainable, and ethical suppliers, because every organization wants to be a responsible organization, and procurement takes on that baton and runs with ESG in organizations. Then, Fred, if you actually look at procurement functions, they have traditionally been something like a command and control function in organizations. People need to pass by procurement in order to have a purchase order issued, in order to have a contract signed, and so on and so forth. That's shifting, that's transitioning. Today, we see that procurement is setting the controls, the guardrails, and empowering employees, empowering business, empowering other people in the organizations to go ahead and buy. And then finally, it's all about agility. The first bullet talks about faster co-innovation, that agility and speed becomes very, very important, because gone are the days that you could take your own time, and procurement is no different. They need to be agile. They need to get results at pace. But at the same time, they need to make sure that as they empower people, as they allow other buyers and organizations, they trust, but they play a very important role in verification and validation. So these are largely the shifts we see in terms of procurement. Again, just want to underline the point that cost will not go away, value will not go away, but keeping the customer at the center of their priorities is very important. If you actually transition to the next slide, I thought I should briefly also touch upon the what we see as, from a Forrester perspective, the 5 procurement trends changing their roles and responsibilities. I mentioned about ESG. Today, ESG is of paramount importance in organizations. I mean, gone are the days when ESG was just a statement in the earnings call, either from the CEO or the CFO. But in order to be a truly responsible company, you need to be much beyond that. And I think procurement function has been given the baton to tackle and also run with this ESG journeys of companies. When I look back at Forrester and the inquiries that I get, I have a large turnout of inquiries on sustainable procurement strategies from both user clients as well as from vendors. I'll just give a couple of quick examples. Everybody knows Adidas. They, the Yeezy line of shoes, and the brand ambassador that they used for promoting their brand line of shoes, made some anti-Semitic remarks, and as a result, millions of shoes were not sold, to the extent that Adidas had to withdraw this entire product line. A couple of supermarket chains in Germany where I'm based, they used to call it the banana row in Ecuador, where child labor was used. There's also Hyundai, the car manufacturer, but I think this was in Alabama in one of their subsidiaries, where again child labor was used. Mars and the palm oil that was sourced from the forest in Malaysia, there was a lot of deforestation there. All these are ESG, and procurement is running with these aspects. So that's a very important aspect that you need to keep in mind. Then when you look at innovation, I mentioned innovation comes from suppliers. Suppliers are the sources of value of innovation. They bring in new ideas. Today, if you take an automotive manufacturer, they invite the suppliers right during the conceptualization phase of a car. It could be a part of the car, maybe airbags, but these brilliant ideas about innovative ideas come from suppliers, and therefore OEMs invite the suppliers not at the end but right at the beginning in the conceptualization phase. So that's that co-creation which is becoming more and more important. And then when you supplier relationship management is becoming more important, the way you build strategic partnerships, OEMs building strategic partnerships with their suppliers and fostering this open communication and collaboration, extremely important. And then specifically over the last 5 years, the pandemic hit us, resilience, came to the forefront. A lot of organizations out there were caught flat-footed. I remember there was a case in India where one systems integrator took almost 6 weeks to provide laptops to its employees because they were more used to working from desktops in the office, and 6 weeks to supply laptops to the work from home employees. That was, that was more of a just in case, just in time planning rather than a just in case scenario planning. Then I know of incidences and anecdotal evidences of even the federal government, for that matter, waiting for weeks for some network equipment to arrive because of that just-in-time procurement that they were using. So risks and resilience are so very important today, and those are those are very important aspects that procurement is running with. So risk mitigation strategies and so on. But the last two trends, I just highlighted these here. That's AI-powered automation and an enforcement to empowerment strategy. What I mean by that, let's start with AI-powered automation. We all know that digital transformation is transcending across all the functions of an organization, and procurement is no exception. We see digital transformation and automation are streamlining procurement processes. They are improving the operational efficiencies. They are enhancing data accuracy and kind of almost automating all the manual tasks. And we see an explosion of AI in the procurement technology. I'll talk to that in a bit about the advances that we see there and how they use AI in each of the processes of the procurement processes. AI is not seen as a magic wand, right? But it's permeating exponentially, maybe selectively at this point of time, but that's something that cannot be ignored. And finally, I mentioned about that shift from enforcement to empowerment. What I mean by that is I talked about the command and control function. Well, procurement can no longer behave like a be all and end all kind of a function. They have to allow self-service to take over in the organization, which they are doing. So this means that that's the new reality. Key parts of the procurement processes need to be empowered so that people can behave sensibly. People can behave within policies and rules that are set up, and it allows many more buyers outside the procurement organization. So these are the kind of the large trends that I see, Fred, that I thought I should talk about it. Back to you.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I think at Ironclad, actually, in SaaS in general, is a microcosm of what you're talking about, where there's so much innovation happening in the vendor and the supplier side. Right, Ironclad is just an example of that, where we have been partnering really closely with legal and legal ops teams historically, and more recently, procurement teams, right, and partnering them directly on these buying decisions. So a lot of specialized tools here, right? So again, this general shift really resonates with us. So let's talk then about where CLM fits in kind of this modern procurement stack, right? We talk about how the landscape is generally changing for procurement. And in a sense, it's a new tech stack, right? So can you tell us a little about what that new tech stack looks like, and how CLM kind of fits in?
This is a very valid question, Fred. And I think, if I, look back at the past 20 years or so, the landscape of procurement technology has undergone profound transformation. I mean, today in 2024, we see that the procurement technology is characterized by, a widespread and comprehensive adoption of the so-called cloud-based procurement platform. You call that the high-tech or the modern smart technology in procurement. Now, that's almost like an indispensable condition. And I mentioned that the application of AI is also changing rapidly. Now, I did a wave analysis recently on the supplier value management. That's Forrester's label for source to pay. It's also called by the name of business spend management. Earlier, people used to call it e-procurement, but nowadays that people knock off the e because it's table stakes. Everybody knows that it's a cloud platform. So when I look at the procurement technology, there are 6 components which you can see here. It typically starts with sourcing. It starts with spend analytics, because enterprises need to know where is their spend happening, and that kind of almost triggers the sourcing decision, which, once you know where is your spend happening, you consolidate your spend with, let's say, tier 1 vendors, and then that decides the sourcing of goods and services. They are actually different. And once sourcing happens, that turns into an agreement. An agreement is a contract. And then a contract becomes a relationship that has to be managed. So that's managing the contract part. Then the purchasing actually happens of that contract. So that's the purchasing. That's the downstream part, purchasing of goods, services, and we also have rolled up travel and expenses in there, which kind of leads to invoices. And once invoice gets paid, it actually feeds into spend analytics. So that way, you look at it as a cycle that starts with spend analytics and goes through all the way back to spend analytics. And we see kind of a lot of vendors in the space offering a holistic suite there. So the way when I said supplier value management, it's actually this portfolio of these 6 components of applications that organizations use to manage their interactions with suppliers. And that's why I put suppliers right at the center there. Now, if you were to kind of deep dive on CLM, now CLM is, from my recent researches that I've seen and the inquiries that I get, and I also did a sizing of the market. CLM market has been, the overall market is growing about 12%, and CLM is growing about 15 to 16%. So one of the most demanded components of these entire 6 components would be the CLM, and then the next would be the supplier risk and performance management. And why is that? That's because today there are a lot of contracts. There are a lot of stakeholders. I will talk to that in a bit. But there are a lot of challenges that companies need to attend to, or they have some legacy systems and they are not able to kind of do things with AI. They are not able to pivot themselves into the latest and greatest. And that's why they look at specific smart technologies there. It could be a suite, it could be a best of breed there. And contract lifecycle management is a very key component that we see is the used technology there.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense that these like general functions make up this modern tech stack, and a lot of companies kind of moving into this best of breed model. And again, that's where Ironclad I think fits in, where traditionally maybe a lot of people use SAP Ariba and the contracting function within it, realizing that, hey, actually I need a kind of a point solution that's just best of breed for contracts. We'll talk more of that later. Let's dive into CLM. And so like maybe one of the things I wanted to talk about was what are the specific pieces of value that people are looking for that's in a CLM when they talk to you and they think about their overall procurement needs. And I'll just maybe, from my perspective, talking to prospects and customers, what I hear most is two needs. One is the contract creation and negotiation process, helping that go faster, making internal collaboration easier, and putting tighter controls around that, right? So just making that overall negotiation, contract creation process much more streamlined. That's value number one. And then value number two is after the contract is signed, how do we use that contract to really manage those contractual obligations and thus the relationship after, right? When it comes time for renewal, for example, with this vendor, did they meet all the contractual obligations, right? What does the risk profile look like for this vendor? And what should I think about going into that renewal discussion? Those are the 2 points of value that we really see at Ironclad. When we talk to procurement teams, I'm curious, Jeffrey, what do you see when you talk to procurement teams?
Absolutely. You just made a point about suites versus best of breed. Just remind me, we can talk about that in a bit, about the difference on that. But now, when I look at contracts, you're right. I mean, contracts play what I see as 2 key roles in business. One is contracts define who does what at what price, when everything goes as planned. The other one is contracts define who is responsible, or in fact, who is liable when, let's say, things do not work as planned. So if you actually look at contracts from a contractual language point of view, 10% of the contract language only tackles that first point of contracting, defining who does what. But almost 90% of the contract language is about who's responsible, who's liable, when things do not work as planned. So that's the way, a contract has been looked at. I was also looking at one survey which we did recently, and then we asked people about their pain points in contracts, and they said that, bulk of their pain points in contract emerge from, they need better or improved contract management efficiencies. Then the next bunch of people, percentage of people said that they need improved visibility and transparency of contracts. And the third sector of people said they need to optimize resources. So that's, when I kind of summarize all this into the issues that that Forrester sees when people talk to us about CLM and the issues there, integrating contracts, or let's say contract lifecycle management with other transaction systems, with other relationship management systems is of key importance there. And then the overall contract portfolio management as well as individual contract management, that liability is very important. I talked about the trends in procurement right at the beginning. Risk management in contract management plays a very key role. And we see a lot of people, worried about risk management and contract management. Will the relationships be managed through the CLM, or will CLM feed into the contract data to buy side and sell side, are typical questions that we see. Now, if I look at C-level execs in organizations, we see that they want to understand the implications of the overall contract portfolio. And then, is the CLM able to address the needs for the next level, like say the general counsel, need for reports, need for analysis, CFO needs reports and analysis, and the third part is optimizing contract value for their CLM. So if I just were to double click on risk, now, the role of risk management in contracts is very important. Contracts, as I mentioned, define who is responsible for what, that 90% of the contract language. It's very important to fully understand the risks in terms of obligations that exist in the contract. Our contracts use these mechanisms as business risk management tools, not just for legal risk management, and that's very important that we see. So, if I look at CLM and this chart that you put there, CLM is one of the most complex systems to implement because it sits right in the middle of three major processes. One is the source to pay process, which I already talked to you about. That's the supplier value management, spend analytics, sourcing, supplier management, relationship management, and the entire P2P. It sits right in the center there. If I look at the lead to cash process as well, how a lead turns into a proposal, CPQ to price proposal, and then contracts is again right at the center there, managing for revenues, discounts, rebate management into order management. And the third vector is the legal operations process, where the legal team uses contract in concern with legal matters to contracts to e-billing. So if you look at this entire piece of puzzle, what might be missing is the business resilience and the risk that we talked about. So post-pandemic, this has become much, much more important. So I would also kind of put almost risk and resilience, covering all these three vectors that we see here. And I think that is the way to look at contract, because you cannot look at, as we say, the just in case scenarios. You need to really be prepared for those black swan scenarios if it happens. So that's where I see that contracts are right in the middle of the business process, right?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. If you look at literally the procurement process, contracting is like right in the middle, right? So it is this connective tissue across your different systems and across all your different needs.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we kind of covered this already in terms of this the value that people look to CLM to provide.
Maybe I can just
Yeah.
quickly just talk about these 5 phases, because it's important that people need to understand. When we talk about CLM solutions, there might be a sequence of value realization. It doesn't necessarily have to follow a sequence, but it's easy to understand and use this as a framework for those who haven't yet gone on this journey, right? I mean, the initial starting point it's kind of almost getting all the contracts in an electronic repository that you can find it. I mean, you don't have to call always legal to say, hey, can you prove that contract for me, and so on and so forth. The second phase is actually, once you have the contracts in the contract repository, you should know what's in there. It should be identifiable. Are there duplicate contracts there? Are there any conflicts there, obligations, rights, and so on? So in reality, it pops up again and again in later stages. And, you have their own set of analysis when new stakeholders join the organization. This is a very important second phase. The third phase is actually automating the contract creation process, entering the information that they need according to various stakeholders, routing it to legal, and so on. So make sure that the contract is done at speed. We talked about agility right at the very beginning, that quick cycle time is of paramount importance. The fourth phase is, how does a contract link, integrate to other transaction systems, to other applications, right? Sourcing, vendor management, and others. The fifth phase is actually, how do you integrate transaction systems and contractual conditions? Contract terms are linked to your transaction systems. It could be a sales contract, perhaps to give a discount to your customer. So let's say you have to give a discount to the customer after the 6th order. Automatically, these could be triggered in your contract lifecycle management and done that. The last point, it's all about optimization. And I think it's very important. Use all the data and the info that you have to improve the processes. You need to maximize the buyer businesses and maximize value from these contracts. And those are the 6 phases that you need to start looking at it. As I said, it appears like a sequence, but it doesn't have to be a sequence. You can start anywhere, but important is to have a tab on all these 6.
Love it. Thank you. Right, so let's dive into maybe some of the meat. I think a lot of people have this question, which is, let's walk through how to select a CLM, right? We hear a lot of the pitches from CLMs. They might sound similar, right? When you advise your clients, how do you have them think about, right, what's the right CLM for them?
Well, good question. I think I would start always with the stakeholders. I mean, the chief procurement officer is no longer the dominant stakeholder in, let's say, the source to pay buying decisions. Today, if you look back at that 6 components I presented, if you deep dive into CLM as well, so you see that general counsel, legal, contract management department has got a say, head of sales do have the say, head of supply chain, chief risk officers. I mean, there are different stakeholders who are coming in as users with their own set of requirements, their needs, their demands on, that are required for their piece of businesses, and you need to meet those demands. Therefore, I think the way you need to look at it is there is a pull. And that's the reason, I wanted to also talk about that suite to a specialist solution. Now, a specialist solutions can, offer this from meeting the needs of multiple people in an organizations. And it's very important to start looking at it, saying, what are the needs of the various stakeholders? As I mentioned, C-level execs want to understand the implications of the overall contract portfolio, but there are others who needs reports. There are others who needs analysis. There are still other stakeholders who just need optimizing the contract. So start looking at it from that point of view, saying, how do you make sure that you are, if you actually transition to the next slide, keep CLM at the heart of the relationships, as I said here. think holistically about the contract lifecycle management. Plan for each of the phases. We talked about that almost like a waterfall model of contract lifecycle management. How does the contract intersect with the buy-side applications? For example, sourcing, risk, procurement of goods and services. Now, sourcing and contracts, take it, it's actually a two-way flow. What I mean by that is once you do sourcing, that you need, that becomes a contract and agreement that has to be managed. But the contract that is expiring could actually trigger a new sourcing event. So that's the way you need to look at CLM having that two-way flow. Similarly, risk. Risk is also a two-way flow because, you need to manage the risk, and any risk that happens has to flow back into your risk management tool. So similarly, there is a pattern not just for the buy side, which I talked to you about mostly in the supplier value management, but look at it also from a sell side perspective. Sales proposals, customer service, contracts. There is always the two-way flow that you need to look. And then, as I mentioned earlier, look at stakeholders. If are there new stakeholders coming into the organizations, what are their needs and demands? How much of the contract is fixed price? CFO actually needs to know that because they need to plan ahead in terms of assigning the relationships and so on. And then the question that we always ask, does CLM feed into the contract data to the buy side, or sell-side relationship management systems? Will relationships be managed through CLM? And the answer is both ways. Now, compliance is very important. Compliance is table stakes. There is no question about should you comply or not. You must comply because that's why rules and legislations are there. Risk categories that you manage. So think of all these aspects, engage comprehensively, get all stakeholders involved. Look at the timing. Look at ease of use, AI driven. That's very important because you can't take up a solution that's still old school in many ways. Today, you need to leverage. We see that a lot of CLM people are understaffed, so there is a more and more requirement to do more. But be pragmatic. Who to involve when. How do you ensure that you're not creating too many smaller applications, but at the same time you need these specialist point solutions in order to leverage that that shift from what I call as efficiencies to effectiveness. You can get a few efficiencies if you're able to automate a few functions, but you need to kind of have the big picture in mind about effectiveness. Fred?
Yep. Totally makes sense. I love it. And I just want to add, you already touched on both these points, but I want to highlight two of them. One is, just on top of the feature comparisons, just a really important consideration is that adoption and ease of use, right? How easy is it for the CLM to get implemented? Because at the end of the day, yes, features are super important and we strive to build the most advanced CLM as well. But the most useful CLM is the one that gets implemented, right, successfully, and that your users are actually using. And we know this is a very complex system at the heart of many different business processes. And so look at the track record. Look at are there many successful implementations, and how long do those implementations take, right? I think that's one very practical consideration that you talked about again and want to highlight. And the second one that I want to talk about is really having a CLM that could work for all your different use cases, right? Because we are in a procurement webinar, we're talking about procurement, but having a CLM that works for both your buy side and your sell side is actually strategic for both, right? Because when you're at the end of the day, you're managing a relationship with a partner, right? That you might both buy from and sell to, and seeing that entire history, that entire contractual relationship, whether it's on the buy side or sell side, is actually useful for both, right? So this is actually, I think, one of the advantages of best of breed, rather than maybe a procurement suite that has a contract management module. So those may be the 2 points that you touched on. I just wanted to highlight a little more. All right. So I want to leave some time for Q&A, but I also have one more topic we can't leave a webinar without talking about, which is AI, right? And so just want to spend a little bit of time here, Jeffrey, if you could just take us through how you see AI really shifting the landscape for both procurement and CLM. We talked about that briefly, and we leave a little bit of time for Q&A.
Yeah, I'll just talk very briefly about it. It's no surprise that you can't turn a blind eye to AI. Procurement perhaps was a little late in the game, but once they adopted AI, across source to pay and CLM in particular, it's kind of exploded, Fred. And I must say that I was looking at the use cases of AI across the supplier value management or source to pay. I mean, spend classification, autonomous sourcing, uh, procure pay, touchless invoice, automation, compliances to ESG. But a lot of my use cases that I've seen are from CLM, automation of contract, generation of new contract. Redlining is like almost table stakes, comprehensive contract management, mitigating contract risks. How do you have, collaborative intelligence, risk-based clause recommendations, for example? Now, that waterfall kind of model that I mentioned, be it repository, reporting, contract creation, compliance, optimization, AI cuts through all these aspects of contract management. It could be just natural language processing and ML to extract and categorize the metadata from your contracts. It could be comparison of clauses and only throwing open the clauses that need negotiations. A vendor's templates versus your own templates, organization's template, 100 pages each. AI will just pick up those 3-4 clauses that need negotiations. Contract creation, as I said, can generate even new clauses and give nudge you to use these clauses, saves a lot of time. Compliances, and there are lots of other values that we see. Regulatory compliances today, it's just happening in different geographies. It's happening according to size of companies, large, medium, and small. Keeping tab of all that, and I think AI will play a very, very crucial role in all these aspects. Fred.
Amazing. Yeah, totally agreed. We see it totally changing in every conversation we have with prospects and customers. Awesome. So with that, I would love to turn it over to our audience and see if there are any questions from the audience. Okay, we have one. What are the potential challenges in adoption of AI in supplier/contract management? What are the best-in-class practices here?
Well, you want to give your thoughts before I talk about it, Fred? Or?
Yeah, I could jump in here. I think so. Maybe a general landscape question. I think my answer definitely would have been different even just 2 years ago, where I think even just 2-3 years ago, a lot of the AI solutions out there, frankly, weren't that real. And so it just wasn't nearly as exciting. I think now AI is truly a value add in a lot of different ways. But one of the core exercises that you need to do is, one, separating the hype from the substance, and two, really having a perspective of where AI can help you in your business processes. Because there is really great AI, but it might actually not match how you need it, and how you're using your products and your own business processes. So I talk to prospects all the time where it's like, hey, I want to use AI, but they don't actually have a handle on how it can be used. And we have the consultative conversation. So I think you need to also look for those vendors that can have that consultative approach with you. So that's probably point one. Anything to add there, Jeffrey?
I fully agree with you. I mean, separate the hype from the reality. That's one. But this point of time, AI is evolving. We see that the the landscape is changing so dynamically. Every 3 months, something new is happening. People learn from their mistakes. But this is the age that I call that, education has happened. Everybody, since 2 years, I've been using AI. This is the time to start exploring and experimenting. Keep the big picture in mind. You don't, start small, with one use cases. You don't have to boil the ocean, because if you make a mistake, you can go back to the boardroom, so to say, make corrective measures, and before you get into that expansion phase. So I would say, don't sit back and wait and stare. That's the wrong strategy with AI. But don't plunge yourself all in. Start small and expand. You will learn a lot because you're exploring, you are experimenting, and you're making those corrective measures. And I think that's the way to get into an expansion phase. And all the things you said, Fred, all's good. Yeah.
That's great. There's another question here. Is generative AI here and usable in practical cases? If so, what are some of the best practices to get C-suite on board? Kind of related to the first question. Yes, I do think it is here and usable. Now, of course, there's a long way to go. And so it does really require you digging in and testing on your particular use cases. And ideally, you find solutions that kind of meet you where you are in terms of some of the challenges with generative AI, right? And so an example of that is an AI agent that can walk you through a bunch of different options and can point out where it's maybe unsure about an answer, as a very simple example, right? And actually, talk about best practices. We have one customer who I thought was super smart. They created basically an internal guide and gave a lot of trainings for their own users on how to use generative AI and some of the tools they're using, right? And so they are guiding their own users through this transition and teaching them really how to use these tools. Because I think that's one maybe practical concern and best practices that if you just give it to people, a lot of people won't know what to do with it. You have to kind of give them the background of what's going on and give them the best practices on how to use these tools.
Fully agree.
2-minute warning. Is there maybe one more question, and then I think we'll have to wrap it up. Okay. Well, I mean, Jeffrey, is there anything else you wanted to add either on this AI topic and best practices or anything else?
Well, I think it was fantastic talking to you. The one point that I thought I wanted to mention there when you talked about suites versus best of breed. I'll just make it in 30 seconds very quickly. The point is sometimes when you go for a suite solution, it's very difficult, to be the best in class for all modules. Assuming a vendor has got so many modules. So there, I have always seen the best practice is to always look at a specialist. You may use a suite for a large part of your source to pay, but CLM is so crucial. Maybe a specialist would, work very closely with the suite player, and that would be a good way to go. And that's something that I thought I can give it as takeaway from this to the audience.
Love it. Well, thank you, Jeffrey. It was really, really great having you. Loved having this conversation. And we hope this was useful for everyone. Again, not just deep diving into CLM for procurement, but really seeing how the procurement landscape is changing, right? And how CLM fits into this new modern tech stack that I think procurement leaders really have to be thinking about. So again, thank you for your time. And for everyone who joined us today, again, if you're interested in learning more about how Ironclad help your team streamline your operations and contracting and procurement, please reach out to us.